Hi there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Very excited for this video today as we're going to cover some potential New Orleans Pelicans trades. A season filled with injury after trading for DeJounte Murray has left them in a very tricky spot. They have draft picks out the door, they have some young players, even Trey Murphy who's been recently extended. They have really quality pieces on this roster, but maybe they're lacking a 1A player. I think a lot of that has hinged on how Zion Williamson's career has panned out, and now with the Pelicans potentially in position to be at the top of the NBA draft once again because of these injuries, it gives them a unique opportunity to maybe sell on some of the existing talent on their roster and replenish some of the draft picks that they owe out the door from that DeJounte Murray trade, and to kind of reconfigure this roster on the fly. Now in today's video, I'm not going to include trades for Herb Jones, who you see on the graphic. I'm not going to include Yves Missi. I'm not going to include Trey Murphy. I'm not going to include Jordan Hawkins. I want to keep a majority of their young guys there in New Orleans. I do think, though, resetting this roster, and we'll start really with players who I think will have a pretty significant market. Mostly Zion Williamson in today's video, if he does become available, would be a fascinating trade candidate. And then also Brandon Ingram, who is an expiring contract. It's very possible we see him get moved. I have one team I want to talk about in today's video specifically centered around Brandon Ingram in a trade that I think does make a lot of sense. I hope you guys do enjoy the video. If you do, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more content, hit that notification bell. Without further ado, let's jump into an important detail that we cannot jump over. It is the first apron hard cap. And New Orleans, because of their offseason moves, they are hard capped at the first apron. Now, at the time I'm recording this, they have $174.326 million of committed salary. The first apron sits at $178.132 million. So if you do the math on that, the Pelicans have just a hair under $4 million of space between where they currently sit and that first apron hard cap. With the hard cap in mind, they cannot exceed that number. Because of those moves, they are hard capped right at the first apron, so they cannot have more money than $178.132 million on their final payroll at season's end. So that's an important and essential note to take in here. If the Pelicans are making trades, they cannot be taking in tons of money. They can take in a little bit, they have a little bit of wiggle room, but they can't be taking in exorbitant amount of money, especially if they are trading away multiple different players. So you have to keep that in mind as we kind of go through this video. And there's going to be even the possibility for the Pelicans to duck below the luxury tax, something they did last year with Kira Lewis Jr. I would not be shocked if they tried to figure out a way to do that again this season, specifically with how poor their season has played out and how aggressive their owners are with not paying the luxury tax, something New Orleans typically always tries to duck under. So keep that in mind in this video as well. But here is a big blockbuster trade, and it is one that would allow Portland to go out and aggressively try to upgrade their roster. Now, the Blazers are still a bad team. They're a rebuilding team, but this is an eye for talent, and if Zion Williamson does become available, we will see a wide host of teams really pursue him in a trade. Teams that are potentially contenders, teams that are on the fringe of the playoffs, and even rebuilding teams given Zion Williamson's age. Just think about half a decade ago, the 2019 NBA draft, there was so much buzz, so much excitement around Zion Williamson. You remember the Pelicans' overjoyous response to getting the first overall pick. It feels like so long ago now at this point, and things just have not panned out there in New Orleans. They have yet to win a playoff series. And Zion Williamson has been almost a non-factor for a majority of any of New Orleans' playoff appearances, and just the way things have played out, they just haven't been good with Zion Williamson, unfortunately. This is Portland's opportunity to maybe swing on the talent that was Zion Williamson and still is Zion Williamson when he plays basketball. Now, obviously, there's been so many off-the-court things with him that has really prohibited him from being the player I think we all know he is capable of being, which is a two-time All-Star, by the way. But he's just not a player that I think has turned into that superstar a lot of people were expecting and hoping for him to be. And Portland is taking that swing here while also trading out their own former top pick, third overall selection, Scoot Henderson from the 2023 NBA draft. He has been somewhat of a letdown so far. Obviously, first year with a smaller guard, you can expect some struggles. I don't think that was too surprising. I think a lot of people were blowing that out of the water. But I think here in year two, we were hoping to see further steps forward in his progression. And, part of that comes down to who the coach is there in Portland. I don't think Chauncey Billups is a good coach, and I think he is probably hindering Scoot Henderson in some ways. I think the whole Blazers roster is at some point in time being hindered by Chauncey Billups coaching, but Scoot Henderson specifically has yet to live up to some of the expectations I and many others had for him pre-draft. And to complete this deal, you see other players involved: Robert Williams III, Matisse Thybulle, Chris Murray. So a couple of young players, a couple of players with tradable salaries in Robert Williams, Matisse Thybulle to match the money. Zion Williamson does make $36 million, so you have to ramp up the money a bit to get to his contract number. Now, importantly here, the Pelicans shave off about $22,000 of salary in this, so it doesn't really hurt them, it doesn't really help them, it just kind of keeps them roughly where they are right now, which again, with the hard cap apron, you have to keep that in mind. They also get 2 first-round picks way down the road in 2029, one via Milwaukee, part of the Drew Holiday Damian Lillard trade, and then also one via Boston. That Bucks pick could become very, very good. Who knows about Boston? I mean, they're so well ran that I wouldn't bet on that 2029 first being super valuable, but you never really know, especially so far down the road. So maybe those become high upside picks, but essentially it's a high draft pick player for a high draft pick player at the heart of this deal. New Orleans did infamously have interest in trading up for Scoot Henderson in the 2023 NBA draft. Now, nothing actually materialized there, but internally we know that organization had interest in Scoot Henderson, probably still feels like there's a player there that they could develop and help blossom into a star like we had maybe anticipated him becoming at some point in his career. He's still really young, and this is an upside long-term grab for the Pelicans, who get a couple of draft picks, more flexibility on the trade market with contracts like Robert Williams and Matisse Thybulle. They have Scoot Henderson, who they would focus their development for at the point guard spot, and the Blazers cash some of their smaller chips in and basically give up on Scoot Henderson for a former number 1 overall pick here, who has had some on-court success, but a lot of off-the-court issues as well along the way in Zion Williamson. Mock trade number 2, this one here centers with the Utah Jazz, and I think importantly here, any team you see going after Zion Williamson or going after Brandon Ingram could very easily pivot to the other one. They both roughly make about the same. Brandon Ingram makes a flat $36 million, whereas Zion Williamson makes $36.7 million. They're both roughly in that same ballpark. So for Portland, even though in this video I talked about them going out and getting Zion Williamson, they could very easily pivot and target Brandon Ingram instead, which is something I've talked about in the past as well. But here in this example, for Utah to go out and get Brandon Ingram, I think this is one that makes a good deal of sense given Danny Ainge's history and the way that he looks to upgrade talent. He's essentially doing one of those YouTube challenges where he tries to turn $1 into $1 million, and he's doing just that. He bought John Collins for essentially nothing from the Atlanta Hawks, got him for basically a sack of pennies, and is now trying to turn him in this trade into Brandon Ingram, a former Western Conference All-Star, probably not going to be an All-Star again in the future, but Utah specifically I think is quite lacking on wings. John Collins has played really well this season, so can the Jazz turn around, move him and a late first-round pick, probably the 30th overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft with the way the Cavs have been playing this year? Can they trade essentially what would be, the worst first-round pick and John Collins, Andrew Eubanks' salary into Brandon Ingram? And I think that would be a pretty meaningful upgrade for the Jazz. And if you're asking why the Pelicans would do this, well, they risk losing Brandon Ingram for nothing. If they make a trade like this, it gives them flexibility into next season with John Collins' contract that they could trade. And like I said, he's been playing well this year. Maybe they could view him as a piece of their future going forward. John Collins still isn't that old of a player. He has a plethora of good years ahead of him, I'm sure, at this point in time. And you get a first-round pick, so you can sell your fan base. You sell the owner on, hey, we got draft compensation for an expiring contract. Now, it's bad draft compensation. It's not a high-quality pick, but it's a first-round pick. So I think that's really where the selling point is for New Orleans. I just don't know if they're going to be able to get a first-round pick out on the market for Brandon Ingram. So to walk away with John Collins, you have a little bit of team control on. To walk out with this first-round pick, I think, is pretty fair value. And for Utah, it's just a pure talent grab. You would extend Brandon Ingram and I think build a more kind of better fit into your roster, hoping Walker Kessler can kind of reemerge to his rookie form with John Collins gone. And then you also have Lauri Markkanen playing probably the 4 with Brandon Ingram playing the 3. You have a little bit more self-creation. And I think the Jazz, a team that is very well positioned for this year's draft, gets a real talent addition here while still not sacrificing their long-term flexibility at all and keeping themselves in the race for a top pick in 2025. Mock trade number 3. This one is with the San Antonio Spurs and would send Zion Williamson, who is one of the most unique body types in the NBA, to San Antonio to play with one of the other most unique body types in the NBA. The alien Victor Wembanyama, standing at 7'5". His arms go on for days, as Jay Billis always says. The combination of Zion Williamson and Victor Wembanyama is utterly fascinating and would be an extremely polarizing combination on the court because of their play styles. Victor Wembanyama, able to stretch the floor, able to handle the ball in transition, can pass the basketball better than any 7-foot-plus guy I've ever seen, excluding, maybe Arvydas Sabonis, Nikola Jokic, of course. And then you look at what Zion Williamson can be as a below-the-rim finisher, a guy who gets on the offensive glass, another transition nightmare, an above-the-rim threat. Just an absolute freak of nature powerhouse, the second jump ability, those kinds of things. Would be very fascinating in San Antonio, pairing him and Wembanyama. A stretch big with Zion Williamson would just provide such a unique spacing context around Zion, and I think it would probably lead to getting the best brand of basketball out of Zion Williamson. And for the Pelicans, you get a younger player in Keldon Johnson who has team control. This is a tradable contract for them moving forward, maintain some of that future flexibility. Zach Collins is in here for salary purposes. I'm not going to lie to you. He's not an attractive get in this trade for New Orleans. He's just purely salary. You get a young player in Blake Wesley, someone who I wasn't super enamored with in his own draft class, but maybe there's some upside, some shot-making potential that the Pelicans could hope he could grow into, and they'd definitely be able to give him the opportunity this year with how their season's been going. You get 2 first-round picks. Not bad ones either. 2025 first via Atlanta. Right now, with the way things sit at the time I'm recording this, that looks like a not great asset. But you never know how the remainder of the season is going to go. If Atlanta has a bad injury at the wrong time or something, maybe that pick could end up still finding its way to the lottery. And then a 2025 first-round pick via Chicago, which is top 10 protected this year. So at best this year, you're picking 11 with that selection. It's also top 8 protected into the next 2 years as well, 2026 and 2027. So that pick, although it doesn't have super high upside for you in terms of potentially ever being a top 4 pick, it still is a very likely lottery pick at some point in time. So for New Orleans to walk out with 2 first-round picks in this year's draft helps them kind of reshuffle the deck very, very quickly here, in addition to their own pick in this year's draft, and getting 2 second-round picks in this deal as well. Also just kind of replenishes some of their draft compensation overall and gives them more direction as a rebuilding, retooling team post Zion Williamson if you do ultimately trade him. Mock trade number 4, and this is one I'm sure a lot of people were anticipating, a trade with the Golden State Warriors, sending Zion Williamson to Golden State to play alongside Steph Curry and Draymond Green, and he would exert more rim pressure in Golden State than any other Warrior to ever play with Steph Curry. Zion Williamson would be an athletic freak that the Warriors just have not had on their roster essentially during Steph's entire career, and that's a testament to how talented and how athletic Zion Williamson still is. Now, again, we've talked at length about all of the problems surrounding him. This isn't an obvious no-brainer decision, but it's one I could see the Warriors seriously weighing coming this trade deadline if Zion Williamson's name does pop up into the trade marketplace, if he does potentially become available, and if the Pelicans are truly taking offers on everybody like we've heard. This makes a ton of sense for Golden State to at least look into, check in on, and at the cost of 2 first-round picks, one being this year, one in 2027, 2 second-round picks in 2028 and 2026. I think this is a solid starting point. Andrew Wiggins is a part of this deal. Funny enough, another former number 1 overall pick gets moved here. Gary Payton II's expiring contract and Guy Santos's cheap contract. I think it's essential to point out here the Warriors, they're pushed up against the first apron as well, so they can't take in too much salary, which is why they actually are giving up more salary than they're receiving in this deal. But I do think it is still a package that does make some sense for both sides. The Pelicans getting first-round draft compensation. This is the beginning framework, maybe. You could argue, do the Warriors need to add a little bit more? Should the Pelicans even be getting 2 unprotected first-round picks for Zion Williamson based on what we've seen in terms of his availability and his consistency on the court? Is that something that is actually warranted? if the Warriors are going to be giving up other key members of their rotation like Andrew Wiggins and like Gary Payton II. Now, for me, I think the talent upgrade is definitely worth it for Golden State, but I could see the Pelicans, first of all, wanting more for Zion, just given his name brand recognition and the, kind of draft pick he was. A no-brainer first overall pick in most people's eyes. I prefer John Morant over Zion Williamson in his draft class, but I totally understood everyone who thought otherwise. I thought that made a lot of sense just given what we saw from Zion at Duke. But it clearly just hasn't panned out that way in the NBA, and I think those were some of the concerns I had coming out of college. So this is a risk for Golden State. It's a risk for San Antonio. It's a risk for Portland. Any team that ultimately does trade for Zion Williamson is taking a real significant risk. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Let me know down in the comment section below who you think should trade for Zion Williamson. I had a lot of fun recording this video. I hope you guys really did enjoy. If you did, smash that like button, subscribe for more future content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.